Hello and welcome to another episode of Combat Analysis of Chivalry Medieval Warfare, where we take a look at hostile engagements, analyse them and talk about ways to improve our playstyle. My name is Marcus and I'm your host this evening. This game was played on Dark Forest, which without a doubt is the most played team objective map in the game. Definitely one of my favourite maps as well. I chose to go with the poleaxe for the better part of it, also one of my favourite weapons of late. I was playing with a friend here, named Salorat. You can't see his marker, but he is the guy in the golden helmet on the left. We started off by chasing down some archers, but that wasn't super interesting to watch, so I'm going to skip ahead to the first real engagement of the game. It starts off with rats dying, so I am forced to take on both of my opponents alone. Now obviously we're going to play this in slow motion afterwards, so I'm not going to talk too much right now. Okay, so I initiate with a slash feint into a stab. However, the man-at-arms doesn't seem to notice my attacking him at all and stabs me right in the middle of my combo. This is something that can happen to you when you're fighting lower skill opponents who don't register your attacks at all, thereby rendering your feints useless and often even counterproductive. That is not to say that I am entirely sure that my first slash would have gone into release anyway had I not feinted, as this attack comes out incredibly quickly. What I probably needed to do here was react to his attack and hopefully manage to do a feint to parry instead of a feint to stab. This is just a result of me focusing a bit too much on what I am doing and not enough on my opponent. It is also quite clear that my camera is facing far too much to the right when going in for the stab. If it was more centered on the man-at-arms, I could have seen his stab more easily. Then I do a panic parry because I'm expecting another attack. Right after that, he has a great opportunity to land a second hit on me while my parry is in recovery, but for some reason he does absolutely nothing, and remains that way for so long that I actually manage to get a stab into release, which ultimately ends up hitting him. I do follow up with an overhead, which he parries. Now if you look carefully here, you can see that I start another overhead immediately afterwards. This is almost always a mistake in this kind of situation, as he just parried my attack, and therefore has priority while I'm in recovery. As a result, I'm forced to feint to parry, but at least I managed to get that right. There is one thing that ultimately influences my next decision, and that is the vanguard approaching from the back. I can hear him moving towards me and need to control him somehow. So instead of going for a riposte or an attack solely meant for the man-at-arms, I throw out a reverse slash, hoping to damage or at least control both of them. This is very important when you're fighting multiple opponents. It isn't super successful because the man-at-arms ends up parrying and thereby stopping it, so my axe never touches the vanguard. Lucky enough, he on the other hand hits the wall, so even though I do get an attack to parry out succeeding my slash, I don't actually need to parry him, and therefore get to keep some of my stamina. The following attack is what ultimately wins me the fight, and it is made possible by the fact that the man-at-arms does not hit me again, even though he technically has time to. I choose a reverse overhead because I'm surrounded by enemies and want to damage both of them. It also has the benefit of slightly evading attacks from the man-at-arms behind me, who otherwise has the ability to flinch me. He ends up dying from this, as he did take a stab from me earlier, and the vanguard dies shortly after because he fails to see my follow-up stab. Then I run down to the cart again and clean up what's left of the Agathian forces. Just two stray knights that get caught up in the middle of our team. The next engagement that I'd like to show is an example of how you can take out a knight very quickly with a poleaxe. As per usual, I do a circle around as I'm approaching to evade their first attack, and it results in a free overhead while he is in recovery. He makes a grave mistake by accidentally parrying right after the first attack, which means that if I combo, he will fail to parry both my attacks. I do a follow-up back lane, which ends up killing him. As you can see, it's possible to make short work of even the tankiest class in the game with this particular weapon. Now let's take a look at a fight where I nearly end up dying and why that is the case. As you can see, I tried to hit the Vanguard with an overhead while he is in charge recovery. This is generally a good move, but I mess up the coordination and miss him by a hair. After that, I'm anticipating an attack from the Knight, which is why I tried to keep my combo afloat by stabbing in his direction. What I completely disregarded was the second Vanguard, who was hiding behind a tree from my point of view. He stops my combo and I'm forced to tank 2 hits and get knocked down to roughly 10 HP. I continue this misplay by parrying right after, which puts me in recovery, and at that point the Vanguard could have very well finished me off with a follow-up overhead. Luckily enough, he ends up missing and I'm granted a second chance to set the record straight. I carefully parry his incoming stab and wait until Silo flinches him from behind before I feel comfortable with starting an overhead. At that point the Vanguard turns to face Silo and I manage to hit him from behind and kill him. After this we clean up the rest and advance to the second objective. Do keep in mind when sneaking up on opponents like I'm doing here with very little HP, that you don't want to get hit by the backline of their attack. They can kill you without even knowing you're there, which is a bit awkward after all. I do get a bit lucky here with a free overhead as he doesn't see me approaching. Then I follow up with a slash simply because I want to hit the Knight on the right, who ends up dying. And right here is a prime example of why it can be disadvantageous to feint lower skill players. I start an alternative overhead very early on, feint it and start another overhead. The Knight in front of me disregards this completely and chooses to go for an attack anyway. If I had not feinted my first attack here, I would have hit him with a 100% certainty. Instead I'm forced to feint to parry on my second attack and ultimately lose 3 instances of stamina. 2 on the feints and 1 on the parry. Both me and Silo throw out overheads on the guy, but he gets knocked back far enough by parrying Silo that my attack misses. Right here he could have very well attacked me and forced me to feint to parry again, which might have even put me in burnout. But luckily for me, he chooses to go for a parry in response to my follow-up stab. Now since he and his friends are separated, with me and Silo closely knit in the middle, I can choose to target switch here and gang up on the man-at-arms to kill him more efficiently. Once he is dead, I circle back for the Knight. He and Silo swing at each other, both end up missing, and I go in to flinch him mid-combo. Alternatively, hit him in recovery if he doesn't start another attack. Sadly, I'm a bit too late and he manages to parry yet again. But then the man-at-arms on the left comes in and misses by just a hair. The Knight tries to parry anyway, which results in him being in recovery. And this time I blow his brains out. At this point in the game I'm 14 kills deep and still haven't died. So I'm pretty happy with my performance so far. It is worth noting, however, that the red team was quite stacked, and once that starts, it does not get better by itself, because people in the losing team start leaving, which results in an even higher disadvantage. The entire second objective turned into quite a stomp. We even got to do a little bit of spawn killing, and I decided to change team on the next objective to keep the server alive and make the game more exciting. Therefore I'm going to do a big jump ahead to my first spawn on Agatha. Without further ado, let's have a look at the fight which results in my first death of the game. It starts off hilariously with both me and Kimmy here attacking at the same time. In order to avoid a hit trade, I do a feint to parry. What I failed to realize was that he was feinting at me, so once I had done my parry, he could have gotten a free hit on me. However, he was also startled by my first attack, and therefore also feinted to parry, but ultimately lost more stamina than me, as he opened with a feint as well. Right after a so-called both party feint to parry, I usually like to go with an accelerated attack because I'm expecting them to anticipate another feint. This doesn't work out for me. He parries and riposts, but I parry that in turn, and neither of us lose any health. After that, I give the feint another go. This time he manages to read it and parries my follow-up overhead. He continues with an accelerated overhead riposte, which I completely failed to see coming. And here I also start seeing several more Masons join the party, so the situation is getting pretty heated. I successfully parry his follow-up backlane, but here I'm a bit hesitant because I'm anticipating the vanguard attack. What I probably could have done is a stab riposte off the backlane directed at the approaching vanguard. But I ended up going for the defensive play, which is to just parry both of them instead. Here I finally do a stab riposte, which is successful, and I'm also lucky that the man-at-arms swinging at me completely misses for some reason. I follow up with a reverse slash, hoping to hit all of my opponents if possible. Sadly, I only get the man-at-arms at the end. I could have actually killed the vanguard as well, since he did panic parry right after my stab, and was open for an attack. I try to follow up with a stab on Kimmy, but he reads the fight correctly and flinches me mid-combo. I should have maybe feinted to parry here instead, but I'm also getting very low on stamina, so that may have just ended with me in burnout instead. Sometimes it's just better to continue the combo and pray to the gods that your opponent won't react efficiently. Kimmy tries for another backlane, which I also see coming. And as he turns around, I do a distinct alternative overhead drag, which bypasses his premature parry. I follow this up with another overhead, which I try to reverse and hit both of them with, but I get turn capped and miss completely. I probably still would have missed the vanguard because it was too far away, but if I can take out just 2 guys in a 1v3, I'm pretty happy with my performance. Ultimately, I only killed the man-at-arms, but overall I think I did fairly okay. It's always hard to deal with multiple opponents. I respawn and run back to the same place again. I'm not going to show this fight in slow motion, I'd just like to give some conclusion to the story. Just as I get close enough to attack Kimmy, I notice there's a man-at-arms tailing me, so I actually choose to turn around at the last second and go for him instead, completely catching him off guard. This target switch technique can work very well in team objective, especially against lower skill opponents. Moving on to a fight at the Cranks. Here we have a pretty scary situation with 3 opponents and just 1 ally. However, one thing is on our side, and that is the bottleneck created by the 2 pillars. This means that they can't all just run in and surround us. I do sort of hesitate here, where I should have actually hit the guy but instead choose to back off again. At the same time, Silo chooses to jump down and run all the way around to attack us from behind. I realize we don't have much time before we're forced to fight on 2 fronts, and decide to run in to try and take out one of the lower skilled players quickly. As I'm doing this, I spot an allied vanguard approaching my opponents from the other side. This is hugely beneficial for us, and I make sure to time my overhead to land while the knight is flinched by the brandy and is the least likely to block. At this point the fight is completely in our favor. I can choose to help either one of my allies here and kill their respective opponent. I choose Silo because the other 2 guys dropped down 1 level and I didn't feel like following. I make sure to stay out of range of him while he's in release so that I don't need to parry anything. Then I move in while he's in wind up of the next coming attack, so that I can get a free hit on him, alternatively force out a feinted parry from him. I follow up with a stab, which he fails to see coming and dies to. Next up, I want to show a fairly large team fight down on ground level. Let's just watch and see what happens. I do a circle around to dodge the slash, but I don't start my attack quickly enough to hit him mid-combo. He does a feint here and I manage to read it, and I eventually parry the next slash in the combo. Now, there are two reasons for my running back here. Firstly, there's the fire that I don't want to step in, and secondly, I'm quite convinced that I can bait out another attack from the vanguard if I just move a little. And this is exactly what ends up happening. Now yet again I waited too long to move into strike to be able to hit him in recovery. However, since he is on fire, he probably can't see very well, and it's not helped by the fact that he's a fairly low skilled player. So I'm comfortable just doing a casual slash without any particular downs moves here. My perception ends up being correct, but take note that I do not continue my combo, and the reason for this is the second vanguard who's approaching from the left. I want to parry this guy's attack first and make sure I don't take any unnecessary damage. Ultimately he ends up missing, but it's always better to be safe than sorry. The fight has been going on for a while and my stamina is still quite full, which is very good, but I'm not gonna start wasting it now, so yet again I back off a little and wait for more swings and misses from the Mason Order. Next up is the benevolent Dreadnought Knight, who swings, goes into recovery, and takes my axe to the head. He dies and I move on to the next target. He swings at a pillar or something, I still haven't quite figured it out. Either way, I wait until the attack is over and go in for the good old hit and recovery. Follow up with a stab, and that concludes the fight. So the key to a good team fight is usually just to position correctly and hit them in recovery. Alright then. I start moving up the ramp here and make my way towards Salo. He makes a very rookie mistake here in panic parrying when I jump, which gives me a free hit on him. Now he does manage to parry my follow-up stab, so I guess he did learn something from last I killed him. The vanguard here on the right luckily misses me by just a hair, and then makes the mistake of backpedaling during the second attack, which makes it easy for me to stay just out of range and move in while he's in recovery. I want to make short work of these guys as I have a lot of opponents, so I feint my following overhead and make sure to hit both of them with the next coming attack. I then finish off the knight with a sneaky stab. Now something I didn't quite realize at the time is that this would have never worked out if Olymp, my vanguard ally, hadn't come in and stabbed Silo to death, or else he definitely would have flinched me before I could kill both of those guys. Then this fight really could have taken an ugly turn, so props to him for that. Then I follow this guy down, chop his head off, dance around this guy, drag, overpower him with my ally man-at-arms. And up here Kimi dies before I even reach him, so it's all going really well for Agathon now. Not just because I changed team, but Olymp, who's a very good player, joined the game at about the same time, and all this made it a lot harder for the Masons to push forward. Now, right off the bat, I do not quite have full stamina. It doesn't end up being a problem in this particular fight, but it's definitely a bad habit. especially against seasoned players like Silo, and in addition to that, this close to the Mason spawn. He starts off with an unsuccessful kick, and I go straight for the overhead. Now I realize during the wind-up that he's going to be able to parry this no problem at all. Therefore I decide to feint the attack, because of the effect that he just failed a kick and I started my first attack during it. He's going to be under more pressure to parry and be much more likely to not read the feint. So, no surprise in him parrying there, allowing me a free hit afterwards. After he parries my follow-up stab, I backpedal a little because I'm waiting for his attack to come out. And I have a better chance of reading feints and dodging attacks altogether if I make a bit of space in between us first. Instead of attacking me, he also moves back, but he doesn't track my positioning before he swings and ends up missing his slash badly. Then I make the next mistake because I get a bit too excited and end up missing my attack as well. This forces me into a combo feint to parry, and I lose quite a bit of stamina here. But I parry successfully and follow up with an alternative drag overhead. He parries too early and bites the dust. Now this little sequence has little value in terms of analysis. I just thought it was a bit funny, so I'm playing it anyway. This is what you call a top 1 enemy betrayal, guys. Alright, coming up next is another solo fight with multiple opponents. Now, obviously the first thing to criticize here is that I'm far too close to the enemy spawn. I'm basically bound to get surrounded if I just stay a couple seconds too long here, and it's not ideal at all. But with that out of the way, let's take a look at the actual combat. I start off with a perfectly respectable slash on the one Vanguard who is open. He actually dies to just one hit, and I move on to the second Vanguard. I try to make short work of him with a feint and an overhead, but I get flinched at the last second by a Brandy Vanguard behind me. He winds up again and actually goes for a feint, which I'm happy to say that I managed to read. Now they're both attacking me at the same time here, and it's actually just out of luck that I don't get hit by the one with the halberd, because there's no way I would have parried that with the camera work I was practicing here. This situation is spiced up even more by a knight approaching me from behind. It's not visible, but I could hear him while I was playing. After parrying the Brandy, I go for a stab. This didn't turn out very well, but the idea isn't too shabby. When you're surrounded like this, your opponents almost never expect you to attack them back, so it's always a good rule of thumb to take your chances and attack when it's your turn. In other words, right after you parry their attacks. As you can see here, the Brandy Vanguard makes the mistake of attacking again, and it gets flinched by me. But it also moves so much to the right that I'm unable to parry the halberd, and thus I take even more damage. Now, I have about 5 health left, and still 3 opponents to take care of, so I accept the fact that I'm probably going to die in the next milliseconds. Therefore, I just try to take as many of them with me as possible, and I do a reverse overhead on the already damaged halberd Vanguard, which ends up working out, and I come out of this entire fight with 2 kills. Not great, but not terrible either. This fight could have gone a lot better if the Brandy Vanguard hadn't moved so much to the right while I was stabbing, because I'm pretty confident I could have parried the halberd then as well, but some small mistakes is all it takes to change the outcome of these fights greatly. At this point I want to switch back to Mason again. You can see here that even Blast, who is a very skilled player, has joined Agatha, so the game is super stacked again, but this time on the other side. Mason is also my favorite team, so that's further advocating for my joining them. And lastly, I want to proceed to the next objective, since I like this map so much and don't want it to end. So I wait for a while until there's room for me and then join Mason for a second time. So here's my first respawn. I just got my ass whooped. Let's have a look at what happened here. Now, for a very long time I'm just running here, unable to see anyone approaching. And right as I make it around the pillar, Olymp shows, and I get a bit startled. I don't think my parry was actually way too early per se. It's just one of these bullshit Super Dragon Vanguard charges having a go with me. But then he follows up with a very nice reverse, which I failed to see coming. And he follows that up with a very dirty but oh so effective stab feint. And he ends me with an overhead. So my main issue in this fight is not so much positioning and faulty thought process, like choosing the wrong attacks or moving incorrectly. It rather comes down to my reflexes being too poor to see the backlink coming, and my reading skills not being up to the task of dealing with stab feints. The best way to deal with that is just to practice. However, I'm not sure it's humanly possible to be completely stab feint proof in this game. Yet again I get my ass handed to me. Let's see what I did wrong. I start off by trying to circle around and hit the knight in recovery. But here I actually miss and end up losing a lot of stamina, because I cancel my second attack to be ready to parry Olymp. Now here I'm anticipating another reverse, but he actually turns this into a drag, so my parry comes out way too early. And then he follows it up with an actual reverse, which puts my HP even lower. Now, I do manage to parry 2 subsequent attacks here, but then I completely mistarget my riposte. I should have targeted the knight instead, could have possibly flinched him and gotten more opportunities to lay in a bit of damage on these guys. Instead I just miss and end up dying. I do get a bit salty after that and decide to switch out my poleaxe for a Sword of War instead. Just a little easier to handle in my opinion, and still very good at taking out vanguards. 2 stabs will do it, just like 2 hits with a poleaxe would. Now let's have a look at another fight at the Cranks. Now, I'm sure you can imagine I'm more than a little upset about the timing there. Just as I was about to end the Vanguard, I got flinched and killed from behind. Oh well. Let's look at it again. Now, I'm gonna pause right here because I want to ramble for a little about a principle I find important. You may be wondering, Burkus, why do you run up to a skilled player like Blast and just do a normal overhead? He's obviously going to parry it, no trouble at all. Well, the thing you have to consider is that Blast knows me, right? He has an idea of how I usually play, and more importantly, he knows that I use feints. And let's be honest, not a lot of people do, especially in Team Objective. So, when I'm fighting against someone that knows me, it's important that I change things up, because otherwise what might happen, and this is actually more common among intermediate players rather than really skilled ones, but it definitely happens with them to some extent as well. What might happen is that they wait for far too long to parry because they're anticipating a feint, and in doing so manage to read it, albeit clumsily. Whereas if they do this overreading, if you will, when you're not feinting, they just take the hit instead. So the reason I do such a simple overhead on Blast is that I want to keep him on his toes and make sure he doesn't get into the habit of reading my feints by overreading. Now, evidently he did parry me easily this time, and in my experience he is actually very good at choosing the right time to parry, so props to him for that. And with that out of the way, let's resume the video. Luckily, Blast gets taken out with a throwing axe, so that I can move on to the next opponent. Now, I do take a hit from the back, I clearly needed a better perception of my surroundings, although the following attack is not an issue. After I fall down here, I quickly check my surroundings to see if there are any other threats to worry about, but it's clear and I can move back up again. Because he misses here, he does lose stamina, and after that attack, I can hear him panting, which means he's close to burnout. All I need to do from here is keep up the pressure and not allow him time for regeneration, and eventually I will get a free hit on him. This is what I was thinking at the time anyway, because you probably know that I don't have enough time to finish him off before I die. I attack him once more, he gets knocked into burnout, but just as I'm about to wind up my finishing blow, I get flinched by Olymp and quickly chopped to pieces. So here you could perhaps argue that I should have done something more spectacular against the Brandy to finish him off sooner, instead of going for the slower play of knocking him into burnout. For instance, a feint at any point would most likely be successful, so that I could kill him in time for my next engagement with Olymp. But then again, I feel like it's a bit of bad manners to feint someone who's already so drained on HP and stamina. I don't know. If you're purely looking to get a crazy KD, that would have been the better option. But this is just my philosophy, I guess. I enjoy not killing everyone in the same exact way, I suppose. Alright, here I'm fighting another fairly low skill player. Just waiting a sec and then starting a drag after parrying them is usually a good way to find an opening, without losing too much stamina. I do feint my subsequent attack cause, well, no mercy for the uninitiated. And then I just wait again for the next panic parry and I finish him off. Comboing is almost always preferable against high skill opponents, but in this case just waiting for panic parries can be more efficient, or at least just as good. Alright, we're approaching the end of this episode. I just want to end with a clip where I actually managed to kill Olymp. I like to come out on top, you know. And here I'm running up the ramp. Now, lucky for me, he takes out his throwing axes just as I come into strike. But he still ends up surviving, runs out of reach and forces me to combo feint to parry. I actually parry both him and the archer, and then proceed to miss a stab riposte, and hence lose a metric fuck ton of stamina. So right here it's looking pretty bad for me. I managed to hit his parry with a reverse, but I'm still up against 3 opponents and only have enough stamina to parry 1 attack. But here he makes a big mistake, as he stabs and panic parries, which puts him in recovery. Because of this, it's my turn to attack, which I do, and he tries to go for a reverse anyway, but it's just way too late. I'm fairly certain he had more stamina than me at this point, and he could have safely parried my attack and just knocked me into burnout after. Maybe he was gambling because he was anticipating a feint. Either way, it's a bad play, and I end up living because of it. At this point, there are just 2 archers left. I'm not entirely sure what this guy is up to, but I'm gonna chase him. And I can see the man-at-arms approaching from a mile away, and I try to make a smooth play by target switching mid-combo and flinching the man-at-arms before he hits me. Unfortunately, it just turns into a hit trade. In hindsight, it's clear that I should have combo feinted to parry here instead, as I had plenty of stamina to work with anyway. And then right after, I choose to go for an aggressive play by winding up again. I am well aware that he's going to flinch me if he also starts attacking, so I keep my right mouse button ready in case I need to feint to parry, which I do. And right after, when it's my turn to attack, I do a nasty stab feint and finish him off. No mercy for rat man-at-arms, guys. Now, unfortunately, we never actually make it past the cistern, but I still managed to pick up a lot of kills, so it's not the end of the world for me. Teams ended up getting stacked quite a bit on both sides over the course of the entire match. It evened out a little at the end, but at that point it was too late. Overall a pretty interesting match. This video is quite a lot longer than the previous episode, but I feel like it also gave me time to discuss and dive deeper into the interesting aspects of this game. I'm still trying to figure out the best way of making these episodes, and that definitely delays them a little for now. Hopefully I can get up to speed in the future. Thank you for watching this episode of Combat Analysis. I hope you enjoyed and hopefully even learned something. Don't forget to subscribe if you'd like to see more of these. If not, maybe we'll just meet on the battlefield instead. That is where the real magic happens after all. Alright, Burkers out.